Hi there and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast, and today I'm looking at a particularly fateful moment in German and European history, the decision on August the 4th, 1914 to go to war, and particularly the decision by the Social Democratic Party to vote for the Kaiser's war credits. It's a decision by the largest socialist party in Europe to give a militarist regime in Germany a virtually unlimited budget with which to wage war. This was partly a kind of, in the eyes of Lenin, a disappointment about the European democratic left, but also a kind of a ringing endorsement of his views of the kind of the treachery that he believed that they were capable of. Lenin viewed the democratic socialist parties of Europe as really being kind of bourgeois parties with a veneer of social democracy that were in many ways more dangerous than the out-and-out conservative or capitalist political forces across Europe, because they had the possibility, the potential to kind of confuse and delude and divide the working classes. If one looks at it from a slightly different point of view, and we're going to dive in there in a moment, the Social Democrats in Germany, the largest working class party, not just in Germany but in Europe, knew that if they opposed the Kaiser's war would be upon them anyway. Russia would march against Germany, and either you would have a Tsarist invasion of Germany, at which point any possibility of social democratic politics, not just in Germany but perhaps in the rest of Europe, would be over. There would be not a chance that an occupying Tsarist army would allow anything other than the most reactionary German politics to manifest itself. Similarly, if Germany put up a spirited defence against Russia without the Social Democratic Party supporting the government, the Social Democrats and the entire democratic left in Germany would be written off as traitors, and they would be suppressed, perhaps with slightly less brutality than if the Russians did it, but certainly with no small amount of violence. So the Social Democrats viewed themselves as being in an enviable position. Some decided that they would break with the party line, which was initially to oppose the war credits, and by the time the vote comes about on August the 4th, the party line crumbles, and there is a mass endorsement by the deputies in the Reichstag of the Kaiser's demand for finance for the war. Kaiser famously says, "I see no political parties here, only Germans." He wishes to present himself as this nationally unifying figure. So we're going to look now more closely at this moment of extreme kind of political tension and possibility. And once again, we're looking at Ring of Steel by Alexander Watson, which is a superb book, one I'd highly recommend if you want to look at the war from the German point of view. And there is so rarely the German and Austro-Hungarian perspective really gets much attention at all. Alexander Watson writes, "The Reichstag session of the 4th of August 1914 was in consequence an immensely powerful piece of political theatre. It was carefully choreographed in order to project a message of German unity. The Chancellor met all parties, including Hasse and his colleague Philipp Scheidemann," these are from the Social Democrats, "at midday on the 3rd of August, and in order to prepare, and although their deputies had not yet settled on a stance, the Social Democrats agreed several symbolic compromises that assumed a unanimous acceptance of war credits. The day of the vote began with a mass in Berlin Cathedral, followed in the early afternoon by the Reichstag opening ceremony at the Imperial Palace. Although, as was usual, SPD deputies, Social Democrat deputies, attended neither, in both the theme of unity was stressed. The Kaiser spontaneously repeated his celebrated promise, "I no longer recognise any parties, I know only Germans." An amnesty for those convicted of political crimes such as lèse-majesté, which above all benefited the Social Democrats, was announced on the same day. The Reichstag session, the day's centrepiece, was attended by all parties, the democratically elected representatives of the German people. The first speech was given by the Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg and outlined the official explanation of the war's causes. Russia had acted duplicitously and aggressively, and France was accused of having attacked without warning. "The great hour of trial has struck for our people," he ended. "Our army is in the field, our navy is ready for battle. Behind them stands the entire German nation. The entire German nation." And here he turned pointedly to the Socialists, united to the last man. I think here it's worth looking at the perspective. It's not just really kind of cynical framing, but these are genuinely held points of view about Germany's strategic position. The reason why the book is called Ring of Steel is because this was a commonly used phrase to describe Germany's strategic position and that of Austria-Hungary, the Central Powers in general, in 1914. The idea that they were surrounded on all sides by enemies, by France, by Russia, and really in the Baltic and the North Sea by the Royal Navy, and that Germany and Austria-Hungary viewed themselves as being under siege and squeezed. What Germany, many Germans believed was being fought was a war of self-defense, a war of national survival. Now, how valid that is as a perspective is, doubtful. I mean, what was actually happening there is the subject of protracted debate in the summer of 1914 and German plans, and you have various theses all the way from Fritz Fischer all the way to Christopher Clark about what Germany was seeking to do, what Germany's strategic objectives were. But the point is, large numbers of ordinary Germans believed that a war of self-defense was being fought. And when German soldiers marched back into the Reich in 1918, the war having ended, Germany not having been invaded, the enemy having been kept off German soil, it is seen by large numbers of Germans as, if not a complete and out-and-out victory, certainly not a defeat, which is why when you have the armistice followed by the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles, many Germans are confounded. How, we didn't lose. Why have we been treated like the losers? And why also have we been treated by the bad guys? We were surrounded by enemies and we kept them out of our country. And, what is basically wrong with that? And of course, you have to have a very selective perspective to ignore the occupation of large parts of France and Belgium and other parts of Europe for a considerable period of time. Watson continues. Even Social Democratic deputies, in a spontaneous show of patriotism, cheered the Chancellor's speech, a first for the Reichstag, where no socialist had ever applauded a government official. The Reichstag president, Dr. Johannes Kampf, a member of the bourgeois Progressive People's Party, echoed the Chancellor in stressing both that this was a war for the defence of the country and that never before have the people been more united than they are today. After an intermission, it was Hasse's turn to get up and speak for the SPD. He had not wanted to do this. It was Hasse who had composed the SPD's appeal of the 25th of July for mass peace demonstrations, and he had remained true to his anti-war convictions to the end. voting in the party's own discussions a day earlier as one of the 14 deputies opposed to passing the war credits motion. Socialist discipline, however, demanded not only unanimity but also a display of party unity, and for this reason members of all opinions had wished Hasse to make the agreed statement. In this statement, a compromise between the different party factions, he condemned past imperialist policies, emphasised how the SPD had striven for peace in cordial agreement with our brothers in France, meaning the other socialist parties in France, and expressed the hope that the horrors of war would awaken in millions abhorrence and win them over to the ideal of socialism and of peace among nations. The statement also, however, warned against the danger posed by the Tsarist Russia for our people and its freedom, insisted on the right of every people to national independence and self-defense, and crucially agreed to the requested war credits. So it's a piece of chicanery on the part of the SPD, of saying, yes, we've done everything we can for peace. Yes, we show solidarity with the French, who we don't want to fight, and our socialist brothers and sisters in France, who we don't want to fight. But Russia is a menace. Russia is a Tsarist autocracy. Russia will steamroller its way into Germany, and every country has the right to self-defense and national independence. And as a result, we therefore, however reluctantly, agree to war credits. The speech met with frosty silence from the right-wing parties, but the centrist progressives, along with the SPD deputies, applauded, and that was sufficient for newspapers to report general acclaim. There was another small hint of divisions to come during the voting, when two minor SPD deputies left the chamber unnoticed in order to having to avoid voting. Nonetheless, the war credits were passed unanimously, and the burgfried, the fortress peace, which a term I'll come to in a moment, in which all internal quarrels were suspended for the duration of hostilities, was thus very publicly demonstrated. The session closed with another and again unprecedented display of unity, when the House, including reformist socialists, gave 3 cheers for Kaiser, Volk and Fatherland. So this term burgfried, the fortress peace, or peace within the fortress, was a kind of a term which implied that for the duration of the war, social conflict would come to an end. And probably social conflict is reduced, is minimised until about 1916, when the economic burdens of the war really begin to rack up on Germany. They really become hugely pronounced. And at that point, any kind of class solidarity in pursuit of wider national goals really breaks down. And by the end of the war, class animosities and tensions are so great that the Kaiser is deposed in a revolution, and that the role of the German Revolution of November 1918 in bringing the war itself to an end is often slightly overlooked. The Reichstag session of the 4th of August strengthened and institutionalised at a national level the solidarity that had started to develop within German society once Russian general mobilization became known. Hansen, after being released from his brief imprisonment, noted already on the 2nd of August, the first day of German mobilization, that reservists' grave anxiety was accompanied by a determination to do one's duty. Others made similar observations. A doctor inspecting draftees in Invading, a Bavarian town not far from the Austrian border, was impressed. From the reserve year groups, all appear, he jotted in his diary of the 4th of August. No man missing. None is ill nor wants to be ill. From the Landwehr group, which is the older reservists, the kind of the dad's army, between 28 and 38 years old, all come. Some are seriously ill, lung and heart complaints, but no one wants to shirk. Everywhere men obeyed their call-up orders conscientiously. Moreover, as the first weeks of war passed and overt patriotism became more prominent, especially where troops were departing. On their trains, the soldiers scored self-confident, aggressive ditties. There was even a ubiquitous promise. Every shot a Russian, every punch a Frenchman, every kick a Brit. More imaginative was a rhyme addressed to the Russian Tsar, which went, "Niklaus, be afraid, from your liver sausage will be made." Food was apparently very much on the minds of departing soldiers. "Menu," stated another piece of train graffiti. "French goulash with Tsar compote, or poincaré soup, Russian salad, English sauce." Another morbid humorist chalked a mock advertisement on the side of his wagon for "quarter litre Russian blood, 30 pfennigs." The crowds seeing off soldiers also became more festive and patriotic by the middle of August. The Watch on the Rhine, frequently German patriotic song that, frequently rose up across the station platforms in these days, although nostalgic songs for home, which were "Home, oh home, I must leave you," Tomorrow I must leave, lovely Berlin," or "Cologne on the Rhine, you pretty little city," were often heard, and it was these that men sung themselves once on their journey to the front. So we have here this public display of unity at the highest level in the Reichstag. Public national displays of unity, which were the product of fear of the Russian army, and of the threat to Germany. We'll look at Austria another time, but particularly the threat to Germany. But people still felt kind of fear and sorrow, and this nationalist fervour couldn't hide the fact that men would miss their families and loved ones would miss their husbands and fathers. On that subject, Watson writes, "Cheering and singing were means for soldiers and civilians, however upset, to express solidarity, temporarily quash anxiety, and cope with the painful emotions of departure. They did indeed help. One man described how the enthusiasm on the railway stations literally swept us along, so that soon the somewhat depressed mood to be seen on several faces on our transport made way for an enthused and confident atmosphere. Some, deeply moved by the scenes, believed themselves to be living through a national rebirth. Middle-class men like Eugen Mortler, a bank trainee, grasped for the Kaiser's rhetoric to explain what they saw. No differences, no parties, everyone helps. Germany is united. While the hope of many intellectuals that the sense of a community they later mythologized and venerated as the spirit of 1914 would be made permanent, it was illusory. The sense itself was widely felt and expressed in the first weeks of the war, and not merely as a strategy for suppressing anxiety. There was a widespread unity of purpose and identification with Germany's cause, which, especially after the SPD voted for the war credits, extended even to the working classes. The chief of Berlin police remarked with surprise a month after the mobilization that his men, who, through their job, have much to do with the worker milieu, can scarcely believe that these are the same people who just recently cheered the Internationale in protest gatherings and now bubble over with patriotism. So it's some really interesting political, social, and kind of emotional dynamics happening here. And the idea of that wasn't kind of unique to Germany, that war would bring about national renewal. Mussolini certainly believed this as a socialist and then sort of fascist journalist in 1914 and 1915. he believed that Italy's involvement in the war would make kind of men of Italians. It would make Italy a society that was unified in more ways than simply just as a result of its geography. This was, in his eyes, the next step in forging a nation of hardy, martial people who would fight and sacrifice and die in the interests of the national cause. In 1914, Germany has been in existence for 43 years. The blinking of an eye in kind of historical terms, but still the kind of nationalist energies that were unleashed as a result of the defeat of France in 1870 and the creation of the German Empire in 1871, many felt kind of dissipated, that the next generation had not really been the kind of the custodians of that, and a new wave of nationalist kind of dynamism was needed in order to transform Germany. And as it says there, because the SPD had finally relented and voted for war credits and really acquiesced to the war, believing they had no further choice, it legitimised the war to the SPD's working class voters. Of course, there were socialists who wouldn't oppose the war, and we'll hear about them later on. The Independent Socialist Party, and then which later morphed into the Communist Party. But these are very much in a minority, and often when wars are announced, it has an uncanny habit of placing the opposition parties on a back foot, because the connection between leadership and rank and file, between the elite and the mob, as Hannah Arendt once talked about, is very, very powerful. And chancellors and Kaisers can say to ordinary people, we are now meant to be coming together as one in the national interest, in this kind of mythologized idea of the nation as a whole. These people are unpatriotic, they are not working in the national cause, and they are, if anything, allying themselves with the enemy. So there are sort of some powerful punishments there for miscreant and dissenting types. So in 1914, perhaps there was no realistic chance that the Socialist Party would be able or willing to oppose the war, and had they done so, what difference would it have made? This didn't stop Lenin, though, in 1914, looking at the SPD in Germany and parties like the Labour Party in Britain and saying, well, you see, these are simply agents of the capitalist order. They look like slightly more benign, but that makes them even worse. And they are there really to do nothing than to serve their capitalist paymasters. They're utterly co-opted by the state and by power, and they all do as they're told, which is certainly a valid critique, but it lacks the nuance of where we're at and what we've just talked about now. Anyway, I hope you found that useful and interesting. Apologies, I think we missed a podcast last week. And I'll catch you next time. Do come and check us out on Patreon. We survive on a little trickle of ad revenue here and a number of patrons who back us. And come and find us on explaininghistory.org. There's always something going on there. Thanks very much, everyone. All the best. Bye-bye.